have the most beautiful state in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and people are leaving.
I'm gonna catch you when all the cameras aren't around, and I'm gonna you up. Oh, quiet.
He's the chairman of the San Francisco GOP, and he's running against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Step back, everyone. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming into the John Dennis Report. Sorry about that. I was in the middle of the last second text. This thing about this modern world, you can get distracted by 50 different directions and people connecting with you all at the same time. But I'm here with you right now in the moment, and thanks for joining me. So we have lots to cover on just one topic today, and that is the crisis at the border. And let me just give you a little background, at least from my own personal thoughts and feelings about this. I'm really steeped in kind of a pro-liberty philosophy, libertarian, you might say, and that's that wing of the Republican Party. I stand as and serve as the vice chairman of an organization called the Republican Liberty Caucus, which represents the libertarian wing of the Republican Party that has its roots, you could say, all the way back to Robert Taft, probably even farther back than that. You might even say Andrew Mellon, Treasury Secretary, and then you can go back. Of course, in more recent times, you have Barry Goldwater, and then Ron Paul, and to some extent, although he doesn't identify as much as he probably should, Rand Paul. You have Thomas Massey in the House. Anyway, so there's a wing, there's a small corner of the big Republican tent for the libertarian wing, and in the libertarian side of the party, in the corner of the in the libertarian side, there's an argument that goes back and forth about how open the border should actually be. Pure libertarians think that the border should be wide open, that we should have the free movement of capital and labor. People should be able to come and go as they please. And if you say, well, what if too many people come here? And then their response is, well, they'll stop coming if there isn't work, and they'll also stop coming if it starts hurting their country. Their countries will change their policies, right? So Mexico, for example, people will stop coming here to Mexico if there are fewer opportunities, and also if it starts hurting Mexico, Mexico will change its policies that are compelling people to leave. Well, anyway. I like that idea in theory. I love the idea of voluntary relationships. I love the idea of people being able to move to wherever they like. But the reality is that people, and I think this is something that my libertarian brethren and sisters miss, is they miss that what we do with nation states is we carve out islands, and we say the rules are this in this island. Now, by the way, I'm just in the theoretical right now. I'm not in the practical, because practically speaking, when you create governments, you have people who are going into those entities, those institutions, and they are trying to manipulate them to gain as much power and influence and and money as they possibly can. But we have a system that of nation states right now. People gather into countries. It started out as overgrown tribes. With the advent of immigration, it's sort of changed over the years, particularly in places like the United States, which takes in half of the world's immigrants every year. So we have these laboratories of how people should live together, and how they resolve disputes and what governments are supposed to do. I feel like that if you have so many people coming in across the border who don't understand what the roots of the country is, or what the roots of the country are, and the laws of the country, then what can happen is those roots get torn up, the laws get diluted because people don't understand them, and then that little island that you've created doesn't continue to exist as it once did. And if you want to preserve and protect the foundations of your country, you have to preserve and protect the borders. It's that simple. I'd like to. I'd love to be convinced otherwise. I think where my libertarian friends are, the point that they're missing, is that people, labor, and people are not widgets. They're not mathematical units. They bring with them all sorts of different ideas and actions and habits and things that they're into and things that they do that might conflict with the rules that were created by people who are in a different culture. And so so you have to take that into consideration. Anyway, this is sort of my long explanation as to my evolution as from being someone who's much more liberal, even dare I say damn near open borders, from my earlier younger years as a libertarian, to someone who's much more concerned about preserving and protecting the island of liberty that we've created here in North America, known as the United States of America. And so so fast forward to let's move up to the Trump first Trump presidency. I think he really kind of exposed exactly what was going on. I mean, people generally knew what was happening, but he really shined a light as to how abused our country was, how abused our middle class, lower middle class, low skill laborers were by the immigration policy instituted by previous governments. And anyway, so right now, so Trump had a very restrictive policy that hurt, that impeded illegal immigration. But today, Biden comes in and basically sends up the white flag and says, everybody's welcome, come on in. And what do we have? We have a massive movement towards an open border. Yeah, can you refresh that page, Mario, and then put it up? Yeah, thanks. Refresh that. Are people seeing that?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, without debate, President Biden has decided on complete open borders. So funny. Notice he's not getting any resistance from the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Look at this. They say that, they've got 100,000 people a day that they're catching, or maybe not catching, but they're, huge numbers of people coming across. And, when Trump tried to withdraw a couple of troops out of Syria and then out of Afghanistan, he got all sorts of pushback. The president's supposed to be in control of foreign policy. And he got all sorts of resistance when he was trying to put up the walls at the border. Couldn't get the money. They wouldn't pass it. The Republicans even dragged their feet. Paul Ryan wasn't supportive. Look at this, people coming across the river there. But here we have, Joe Biden opens the borders up effectively, and nobody says boo. Nobody says a word, because there are powerful interests who want to keep the borders open, who want that cheap labor moving across into our country, irrespective of what it does to the lower and the middle classes. So in any event, that's one of the things that's happening. And so with Biden, like, here's one example. When someone came to the border and said that they wanted asylum in the United States, well, first of all, asylum, originally the way it was set up was people were under threat from political persecution. They were under threat by rogue governments that were, going to imprison them or threaten their safety. It wasn't set up to be because you live in a bad neighborhood. It wasn't set up. You weren't set up. Asylum isn't set up to let people in because they want better, economic opportunities. They have to really fear persecution from their government. That's the main reason to come here, for religious reasons or, political reasons or something like that. Now people are just showing up and they're like, hey, I want to seek asylum here in the United States because I want to leave my country because I want a better life. Well, that's A, not how it works. B, under Trump, when those people showed up at the border seeking asylum, he changed the policy so that they could apply for asylum, but they had to stay in the country from which they just came. So even if, for example, they came up from Honduras, made the trek up through Mexico to get to the border, they would apply at a port of entry into the United States, and then they would have to stay in Mexico. They wouldn't be allowed in the country. That was something that Trump changed. The policy before that was known as catch and release, and where people would seek asylum, they would file their papers, and then they would be released inside the United States and go God knows where, and go everywhere. And they would have a hearing about their asylum, and over 90% of them never came back. They just stayed in the United States and lived underground. And that's actually the underground illegal immigrant community. That's like a full-on operation right now. There's a whole separate economy out there. So if you get released, there are all sorts of methods and ways around the system so that you can survive here without having to go back to your trial. So that was the catch and release was the policy before Trump. Trump ended it, said if you want asylum, you have to stay in Mexico until we adjudicate your case. And that was it. Now under Biden has reinstated catch and release. So now the border is being flooded. He basically sent a green light to Central South America and Mexico and said, let people come in. It's game on. Just roll into the United States. And this is, again, we can do so many things to make things easier for low-skilled wage earners. We can do so many things to help lower middle-class people. We can do so many things to help the middle class if we'll just strip away the government impediments that allow people to work, and it'll actually help to make us more competitive in the world so that we don't have to go overseas and do business in places like China. But there's no political will for that. That's effectively treating the American people like adults and saying no to them, and nobody seems to want to do that. So instead, Chamber of Commerce and big companies, they just say, okay, well, just send in cheap labor. Just send them in. If we can't change the laws to have the cheaper labor here, then just send in the cheap labor and we'll work outside of the legal system. And that's what you have. And that's what's happening right now. I want you to also imagine this. Mexico is a failed state. They have control over, parts of Mexico, but on the border, they have no control whatsoever. The cartels control it. If you try to go up through the areas controlled by the cartels near the border and don't pay them, you'll end up, another rotting corpse in the desert. And so Mexico can't stop this. They've tried, but they really don't have control. The cartels have way too much power. They have way too much money. They can bribe tons of people in the Mexican government, and that gives them even more cover. But imagine this. Imagine if you had an area, the entire border from, say, Southern California over through Arizona into New Mexico. Imagine that a whole area was controlled in the United States by a big gang, some big gang. Doesn't need an ethnicity, doesn't matter, just a big gang of God knows who, of the who cares, whatever their name is. I don't want to even put colors on there because then you get into the middle of, some other gangs that really do affiliate with colors. But imagine that that there's a gang, an American-based gang, that controls that area. How would you feel about your country if they allowed that to happen? If the federal government and the local and the state governments allowed an area, huge swath of the United States to be controlled by something other than entities of governments within the United States. Can you imagine? Well, that's what's happening in northern Mexico right now. They control the entire border on the south side of the border and the Mexican side of the border. But now Joe Biden's policies means that they now control both sides of the border effectively because they're getting what they want. They're able to push people through. For the cartels, if they get into the drug business, let's say they make the drugs themselves, they'd have to produce them. They have to take on the risk of the production and keeping the operations quiet. They have to transport the drugs up through, and there's a lot of risk involved in that. If they're just doing the distribution and smuggling on behalf of cocaine dealers or fentanyl dealers, cocaine dealers out of Colombia or fentanyl dealers out of China, they take on the risk. If they lose they lose the product that they're shipping across, they run the risk. But with human trafficking, there's no risk. They don't have to house the people. They don't have to feed them. People just show up and they just shuttle them across. Very little overhead, and it's a great business. It's a great business that they don't have any overhead in. So now they have an enormous incentive to control the Mexican side of the border. And now Joe Biden has basically said, open the gates. Your business is going to boom because you can now get people across the United States into the United States. And that includes people who you sex traffic. You sex traffic them on your side of the border. Then they get across and they owe you money for getting them across. And they're living in communities in the United States in which you have some degree of control, so that those young women have to continue to be sex trafficked in the United States. This is what Joe Biden has done by opening up the borders. So what he's effectively also done is, part of the bills that they are proposing, and I think this is actually in one of their bills. I know it's not HR 1, it's another one. But basically, they're talking about decriminalizing illegal entry into the country. I mean, anybody who enters the country illegally and gets caught should be made to leave. You don't have to throw the book at them, but they should leave at least, right? They're caught, got to get their act together and move them. I lived in Europe for 4 years, and if I overstayed, the allotted length, I assumed that someone would come and track me down and say, "Hey, listen, you've overstayed your time here in Holland or France or Ireland, whatever it is, and you have to leave." That's what I would expect. If you decriminalize the act of illegally coming into the country, again, it's another incentive to send out. It's a message sent to people who want to come here. Get on that train and come on up, because nothing's going to stop you. And if you get caught, you're not going to get in trouble. So there's no risk whatsoever. But even Democrats are challenging Biden. So here he is. Here. Is that up? Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So Henry Cuellar is a Democrat in Texas. I think he represents the area around Laredo. And it first came up, I heard his name for the first time last night on Tucker Carlson, and now he was on Brian Kilmeade's radio show today talking about how badly the Biden administration is handling the border. This is a Democrat criticizing Joe Biden. This is a Democrat saying that what he's doing is creating a catastrophe. Biden sent a delegation down and didn't say a word to Cuellar. and then said basically, what Cuellar is saying is they are pretending to know the border and the situation better than I do after only having been there a couple of hours. This delegation was down there for a couple of hours, and they were like, "Oh, okay, we know what to do," and da da da. Okay, so 1 second. Hey, are we up on Periscope?
Yes.
Huh. It's funny, I don't see it here. Anyway, so Democrats who know what's going on, who live in the area, are pushing back on this as well. They see what's happening. Hold on, I'm going to go to my John Dennis for Congress page. So we have a real situation, and this, by the way, is like less than 2 months into the Biden administration, and this is what we're dealing with. So, if this keeps going on, the only upside is that, there are staggering numbers. And what's happening is, I'm sorry, it's one other point I wanted to make. 3,250 unaccompanied minors, 3,250 unaccompanied minors, I think in the last 30 days, came up through the border. And what they do is, the strategy is, they send the kids up, because the kids go with, they come up here, they won't turn away kids. They'll send them off with somebody who they think are relatives. And then once the kid's in the U.S., the parents on the other side of the border use them as an excuse to get into the United States, where, in which case they will end up staying as well. And it's a terrible thing. I mean, think about that. They're putting their kids up for, hold on 1 second. They're putting their kids up into this, into this very risky situation. So I don't know. It's not going well. They're creating a humanitarian crisis, and it's an unmitigated disaster. I mean, the only thing I can think of that's positive out of this is that Joe Biden is going to really drive people to the Republican Party and drive the House into the hands of the Republicans in 2022. You could see it, it's just this build. It's not even a slow build. It's like this ongoing disaster. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is roaming around. He can't talk to people. He's a mess. They're shouting questions at him. He doesn't know where he is half the time. It's a terrible thing. I'm looking forward to when he finally does a press conference. We haven't seen one, and how he'll perform. It's going to be like watching a guy walking a wire over a canyon or something without a net underneath. That's going to be interesting, and it'll also be interesting to see whether or not the media actually asks him about this particular situation. He's creating a humanitarian mess on the southern border for the people who are coming here by sending the signal that they're welcome, and then he's also not taking into consideration the needs of the people in the United States. And they're going to respond. And probably in the favor of the Republicans in 2022. So keep an eye on that situation. If we don't get control of the border, as Ann Coulter says in her book, Adios America, we will lose this country. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. I want to ask you to please listen to our podcast. It's on Apple and on Spotify, YouTube, John Dennis Report. Please subscribe there in particular. Facebook, the John Dennis Report as well, and John Dennis for Congress. Twitter at Real John Dennis and at Real John Dennis on Instagram. Please join us here and follow what's going on with the campaigns, and I'll keep you abreast of what's happening in the world. And it's funny because I have not really done a lot on the border situation in the past. Other people have covered it, but I think that we have lots of pressures on the United States to stay together as a country. And if we can't resolve this particular pressure, we're in a tough spot, in a really tough situation. And needless to say, you haven't heard word one out of Nancy Pelosi on this. Nancy Pelosi is completely, out of touch. and not even commenting on what's going on there, because she thinks that walls are immoral unless they're the walls that protect her, or the fences that protect her. So in any event, thanks again for joining me today. We will continue this discussion on Thursday, trying to release some video. We have a couple of videos we're editing and bouncing around right now, including an introduction video to our campaign. And let's see where when those get released. But until then, until we release those, we will definitely see you Thursday. So thanks for joining us.